welcome everyone to the fifth series, the fifth session in the Rubix Knowledge Series. And today's session is very special, not just because I have two very close friends and a mentor probably on the call with me, but also because it talks about a subject which I think is close to everyone right now in this period of tremendous uncertainty, which is what are the business lessons that we have learned in this new normal world. Our panelists today are both managing partners of Accord India, besides being very close friends. Sonal Agrawal, who has got over 25 years of search experience. She leads the private equity, financial services, life sciences, and industrial practices at Accord. She works very closely with conglomerates in the board and diversity areas and anchors the private equity practice for Alto Partners globally. She serves on the global board of Alto Partners, which is a top 10 global executive search and leadership consulting partnership, which operates in the Americas, in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific. She's also on the board of AESC, which is a global association of executive search and leadership consulting firms. She has served on the board of Accord and ABC Consultants and the global deal network of the Young Presidents Organization. She is a part of the FICCI Task Force for Diversity and Inclusion and very often speaks about diversity, leadership, and doing business in India. She has actually conceptualized and runs the ET Prime, Economic Times Prime Women Leadership Awards as the knowledge partner for ET. She's an MBA from the London Business School. She's been named by the Economic Times as one of the top 10 headhunters in India, by Business Week US as one of the 150 most influential headhunters in the world, and by Business Today magazine as one of the next 30 most powerful women in business. I don't know how much you're going to be more powerful than you are already, Sonal. So, but yeah, okay. Toral has 27 years of search experience in the executive space. She previously managed the Western region and Middle East operations for ABC Consultants before co-founding Accord in 2001. As managing partner, she is based in Mumbai and she leads and manages the consumer, retail, media, and real estate practices with additional experience in private equity. She serves on the board of Accord on the ABC Group and is a member of EO, which is the entrepreneurship organization. She's a graduate of Sydenham College, Mumbai, where she completed a postgrad degree in personnel management from Bombay University, and then did the accelerated development program from London Business School. So as you can tell, we have very illustrious pedigree in both our speakers today. I'm going to get down straight to it. And Sonal, this first question is for you. Both of you have been helping companies hire leaders for over 25 years now. We've seen a variety of crises over the years, whether it was 9/11, whether it's 26/11 and its aftermath, the global financial crisis of 2008-9, the economic slowdown of 2011. In your experience, is this the worst crisis to have hit us so far? And how is it different from the other crises that we have encountered?
You made us sound very long in the tooth, Kaushal, because we've been through all of these. But I think the differences here are multifold. One is that it is truly a global crisis. It's not regional, it's not sectoral. It's impacting everything and everybody. I would say that the crisis is really on 4 different axes, which is, again, what makes it unusual. It's financial, of course. It's humanitarian, and health, which we are obviously focusing on. It's also a demand crisis as well as a supply crisis. And I don't know that we've seen something like this all coming together at a global scale, at least certainly not in our lifetime, but it may be unprecedented overall. And I don't want to use the word unprecedented too much. The challenges that it poses for governments to respond to this, or for health officials to respond to this, are also unbelievable. So it is truly anyway you can do it. Sorry?
So I'll just add here that, I think it's expected that the global economy is actually going to shrink by 3% thanks to this crisis. It ranges from, large economies shrinking from up to 9% to more developing emerging markets shrinking, 1%. And that in itself is also unprecedented in terms of just the sheer impact this is going to have right across the globe. In terms of jobs as well, I think we're seeing, so for example, the US had 25% unemployment benefits at peak being raised. India, and the statistics are obviously still coming through, but it is believed that there has been 11 crore job losses in India already linked to this crisis. Governments have tried to provide support, and again, it has ranged from somewhere around 5.7% all the way through to 21% of GDP in the case of something like Japan. But I think most experts believe that that is not going to be nearly enough to deal with what the economy is going to go through. So yes, it's at least in our lifetimes, I think this is probably a much deeper crisis and unprecedented in nature.
Right. Sonal, just a request from the audience. I think people aren't able to hear you. I think the microphone is a bit distant. So if you could.
I'm going to change my headphones as well. I've tried a new pair. So just bear with me a second. Yeah.
Yes. So, Toral, I'll ask you till then while the switch is happening. Both of you are constantly speaking with CEOs. What are the top 3 or 4 challenges that are keeping CEOs up at night as they manage through this pandemic?
So I think there are lots, but I'll try and pick a few that we're hearing most often from people we speak with. So I think the biggest one is just driving through this storm when all dashboards are broken. So nobody quite knows what's happening.
I love that.
And just getting through it. How do you keep business relevant when everything is changing? Whether it's in terms of digital transformation at completely breakneck speed, balancing business needs and employees' safety and health and wellness needs, organizational agility to manage all of this change that is hitting from every direction. And the other one, I think, is just how do you ensure you have collaborative teams who are empowered to actually find solutions when every day is a new day. So these are things that we're hearing again and again from CEOs across sectors, across businesses, and it seems to be keeping them definitely awake at night.
So I serve on the board of the AESC, and they run a survey every year about leadership and what the top agenda for the C-suite is. And many of the words that Toral used are sort of resonating with that survey, which you can actually get online. But it's agility, it's collaboration, innovation, all of that. I think people went through a few phases. In the beginning, it was all about safety first, and that certainly kept everyone awake at night, and business continuity. And then it was followed quite quickly about concerns about conserving cash and about profitability and how to manage a crisis which nobody has a timeline on. Then it became also about people, safety, engagement, setting up new protocols, pivoting your business, trying to figure out how to move, and that's where agility, etc., comes in. But I think the biggest thing that I know that leaders have struggled with in my conversations with some of them is just keeping themselves motivated. It's keeping themselves resilient. It's keeping themselves, just giving themselves in the face of everything, the ability to get up and go on and stand in front of their teams and lead. And that, I think, has been the single biggest one. A lot of soul searching has happened with a number of CEOs, just in terms of what keeps them awake at night, what's important to them, what life is going to look like for them later, what their priorities are going to be.
So it's very interesting. I was reading somewhere that anyway, CEOs tend to suffer, and all leaders, not just CEOs, all CEOs and leaders suffer from the imposter syndrome. But they're saying that right now that's even more prevalent. That everyone is feeling that they're not up to managing and powering through this crisis, because you're helpless in many ways, right? The traditional levers that you have, you don't have available. Which leads me to my next question. Sonal, you can take this first. Uh, Again, you work with company boards very closely. You work with CEOs to hire senior managers. What are companies looking for in CEOs and CXOs and all business leaders essentially as we navigate these uncharted waters of the new normal world?
So I'm going to say that the basics in terms of what they look for is pretty much the same. I mean, leadership is leadership. So you're still talking about obviously base intellect. We're talking about agility and collaboration and inclusion and innovation and ability to take decisions and action orientation and all of the stuff, which again is on this report that we were talking about. I think the one that has come to the forefront perhaps in the last few months has been empathy. It's been about inclusion. It's been about just the ability to keep calm and power on, and to make some quick decisions, to be able to react and then to recalibrate fairly quickly. So I think we're going to be seeing much more of that going forward. And it's certainly going to be a question going forward in terms of interviews. What did you do, or what did you do in your business when COVID was happening?
That's a great point. So I think that's,
I'll just add one more to that, and I think that is just communication. That's becoming absolutely critical. So it's not enough to just do what you do and do it quietly as a leader, but being able to communicate in the new world remotely, differently, much more than normal, to both share as well as provide comfort as well as recalibrate is becoming another very critical skill.
And digital, of course.
Absolutely. There is a question, but yeah. The one thing that I was reading again is the role of CEO as chief crisis manager, if you will. I think we're not, we still don't have a playbook for managing a crisis, except in terms of a communications playbook, if at all. Corporate communications, if a crisis hits, you have a product issue, you have a HR issue, you have some issue that sort of kicks in. But I think this will, force people to go and look at a disaster playbook. People say you have a business continuity plan, but you don't have a disaster recovery plan. Literally, as opposed to just an IT plan. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
It's interesting you say that, Kaushal, because on a webinar I was on recently, someone talked about the COVID test and incorporating that into business processes. So what's the COVID filter? Will this new process pass the COVID filter? Is something we heard, and I thought that was very, very interesting and telling.
It's a great idea. That's a great point. The COVID filter.
And financial institutions certainly went through this in the light of 9/11 or after SARS. They did put some of these plans in play, and some of the organizations that pivoted quickly was because they actually had a playbook. Obviously, They didn't anticipate everything coming together from different directions, but they did have a few protocols in place which allowed them to function immediately.
Right. Toral, you spoke about a webinar and some comments from there. So I want to actually speak with you about innovation in the new normal. You had hosted a webinar on this topic, innovation in the new normal, with top-notch CEOs of consumer businesses, including Harit Nagpal of Tata Sky, Damodar Mall of Reliance Retail, Devendra Chala of Spencer's Retail, and Pratik Kota of Jubilant Foodworks.
Samir from ITC.
And Samir from ITC, sorry, yes. It was a great conversation. Can you share some of the insights from these leaders on innovation, how companies can innovate in these difficult times?
So, that was a webinar that was slightly long, went on for an hour and 48 minutes. So I'm not going to share everything they said. Anyway, the video link for that, as well as our synopsis of it, is up on the Accord India LinkedIn page. So people can take a look at the broader elements if they wish. but I'll pick a few that I think resonated with me in particular. So I think one that I heard was innovation at gunpoint rather than innovation in the new normal, and how the situation has been one where what normally takes 18 months had to be crunched in 18 days. And I thought, that was quite telling. The other was just in terms of how do you crunch timelines from differentiation to distribution, which you learn over 15 years into 6 weeks. So again, the different facets of innovation beyond just the product or service innovation, right to distributing it and every other part in between. The most fascinating line I heard was, and this was in reaction to the context, which was 4 phases of innovation, which is cry, why, try, and fly, where a lot of people get stuck in crying about the situation or asking, why is this happening? And a few move to actually trying and then flying, which is the innovative phase. And I think the most telling remark was, acha leader rota nahi hai. He just gets on with it. And I think that to me sort of summarized really what this was all about. But some of the learnings that we gleaned from them, I think one which came through loud and clear was simplify, simplify, simplify. Focus, prioritize on core essentials of the business instead of trying to do too many things at a time like this. Another one was just in terms of the culture of the team and alignment, which became critical in terms of ensuring a response, appropriate response in a timely fashion. A third was around remote communication and how critical that had started to become when you have dispersed large teams and businesses. A fifth was in terms of just staying open and not limiting yourself. Another one was about picking that one customer insight and then allowing your experience and instinct to back it completely and action it, as opposed to getting too mired in mulling it and mulling it and mulling it. As they say, hindsight is 20/20, and in this case, quite literally. I think the COVID filter for all processes, but at the same time, not compromising on safety and efficacy of anything you put out was another key one that came through. So I think there are lots of learnings. I could go on and on, but these were 4 or 5 that I tried to pick from the many ones that are there. And like I said, please do go and watch the full video, read the synopsis. It's all up there on LinkedIn, and follow Accord.
Yeah, it's truly a masterclass. It's on the Accord site. I'll also plug Accord, no problems in doing that. But it was a masterclass, 1 hour, 48 minutes, extremely well spent in terms of, how it went. It's the longest webinar I attended during this, during the pandemic, probably ever attended. And it was worth every minute. So please do go check it out. Sonal, next one's for you. I heard you say in an interview, and this is on video, so you can't deny it, but you said that leadership is about enabling your team to become the best version of themselves. So I know you've said this well before the pandemic, but how does a leader help her or his team to be successful with all the constraints of an ongoing crisis? So you're talking about financial constraints, you're talking about health safety, you're talking, everything. How do you help the team become the best that they are under those circumstances?
One generic comment. I think the genesis of this came from a lesson which my father learned. He was struggling with handing over the reins or allowing Toral and myself, who had been in the business for about a decade or so, just to run things on our own. And a board advisor at the time told him, saying, "Look, they're never going to learn how to drive if you keep your hand on the handbrake or your foot on the pedal. So sit next to them and keep a light touch on the wheel. Tell them what to do. Point out the pitfalls, but let them drive." So that was a lesson where I think his relationship with us pivoted a little bit, just in terms of letting us do our thing or learning, etc. And I think we've carried that lesson forward. But I think in the context of the crisis, there has been, again, as I said, keeping calm, or trying to anyway, synthesizing data, encouraging ideas, listening, roping in people to, I mean, to understand that you can't do everything yourself, and roping in people to take on different bits, even if it's not part of their job description, empowering them to go ahead and do it. And just constantly talking to people and communicating about why you're doing things, what the realities are, what the fears are, as well as what the good news is, and keep on giving honest feedback, and just walking through it together. One of the things we learned, at least both of us learned through this, was we miss not being at work and being able to pick up verbal cues from each other. And I think a valuable lesson was to reach out and check in with people proactively, because not everybody was sharing what they went through. You know, somebody was sick in our team, and it turned out to be typhoid. I never thought I'd hear the word saying, "Thank God it was only typhoid," but we didn't know because we hadn't checked in for 2 or 3 days. So that was one of the bits, not so much about leadership or but just engaging with the team and helping them come out and be a part of the solution, not just a part of the problem.
Right. Toral, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think she's covered it all. So absolutely.
Okay. So folks, please keep the questions coming. There's a Q&A tab. We'll try and take as many questions as possible. So please do that. Toral, this one's for you. We've seen a number of companies having to resize themselves during the pandemic. There have been heavy job losses in the economy, both here and overseas. For both the employees and the company, this is never easy. We have a lot of HR folks on this call. We also have lots of finance folks. How do chief HR officers and companies handle job cuts in a sensitive way so as to protect the company's employer branding in the long term while taking these tough decisions for the immediate period?
So I think job cuts are, like you said, they're never easy. They're probably the hardest part of any business leader's job, whether they are HR or CEOs or anything. But I think at times like this, they get a little tougher. So a few things. I think one is to be very clear about the business logic behind the cuts is absolutely imperative. To reinforce, that the decision is not so much about the employee per se, but about the situation, and to enforce that to the person who is being laid off or cut. I think communication and empathy are absolutely critical. Having those one-on-one conversations and walking people through the logic, the reasoning, but equally also in terms of just what will continue. So, are there, for example, certain benefits that they can continue to use during, even after they have officially been laid off? Health benefits, insurance benefits. Is there going to be extra pay given to them beyond what is officially due as notice pay? Who can they use as references? And what is the business likely to say about their move outside? These are things that employees need to hear. They need to know, they need to be told. And I'll just add one, Sonal, before you jump in, is, the other bit is, so we actually run a service which is called a career transition service for leadership talent that is in exactly this situation, where we get contracted by the company to actually help such leadership talent through this phase when they have to move out of an organization. It's a full-blown leadership consulting product, and it definitely eases the journey for the employee who is being laid off. But more importantly, also, it leaves them with a sense of hope as well as comfort that their employer, while they've had to take a very hard decision, is being humane and is still caring about them. And, at the end of the day, employees will remember how organizations treated them during this period. And that is what will go a long way in terms of just managing their employer brand. So I would encourage, any companies that are having to part with leadership talent to seriously consider a career transition solution, because it definitely makes it easier for the employee moving out to have a better shot at landing that next role or job. And it's something we've heard time and time again from both the company and the employee, that it was something they really appreciated.
I think to add to that, once somebody has been, or there's been a right sizing, if you will, the company has to go back to focusing on who's left and business as usual, etc. After that, it's not a bad idea to then hand over the displaced employees to somebody who's actually going to focus on them and on their interests and taking them forward. So that's been, certainly we've had some very progressive companies reaching out to us for that, and we've done a reasonable amount of work on that front, particularly in these times.
Yeah, I think it's very important, because otherwise the key emotion that people feel is abandonment. I gave so many years to my employer and now I'm abandoned. And suddenly when that happens, that's a very, it's not a good space to be in emotionally for the employee, and it has huge implications for employer branding as well. So I certainly think that's it's a powerful solution. Coming to something more optimistic, each week I look forward to the moves column in the Mint, where Accord India lists out all the CXO level moves in corporate India. And I like what both of you write, that the wheel keeps turning. It sort of signals a sense of normalcy in this crazy period. How do you see the employment scenario play out over the 1 year period? A lot of people have asked that question. In fact, there's Girish with a whole bunch of statistics, so why is there so much pessimism? What's happening at a macro level, in terms of employment? Where do you see it going?
Let me go first. There is a lot of pain. They continue, and there will be a lot of pain. And obviously some sectors, some industries, some functions are going to see that more than others. I think also there'll be a structural change. The middle management layer will probably see itself being the most effective, because a lot of that is to do with hierarchy, span of control, etc. And as we know, those things are changing rapidly with whatever's happening. So all of that is going to happen. I think we as a business are reasonably well placed, because the impact at the leadership level or the need for leadership doesn't change. And in fact, it has probably become a little bit more acute than it was before. It's a different kind of leadership hiring that's happening. So you're not hiring for growth, you're not hiring for expansion or what have you, but you are hiring. None of our searches were cancelled to start with. Some got delayed.
Wow.
Actually moved faster than usual because of people's availability, etc. Our UK partner, and I was on a board call last night, is actually having the best year they've ever had, because companies are using this as an opportunity to shake up their leadership and reset what that team looks like, which would have probably taken them years to sort out otherwise.
Correct.
So traditional growth-based hiring will decline. Middle management hiring will decline, but the demand for leadership, or a different kind of leadership, will actually remain strong. Now, it depends on where you're sitting in this entire circus to see whether it looks good for you or whether it looks bad for you. But there is stuff happening.
Toral, any thoughts?
Well, I'll add there that, I think most people believe certain sectors are the only ones that will hire. And I'll just add here that that's not necessarily true. So I'll just take two sectors that, contrary to what we read in the papers every day, we had searches running in hospitality and real estate, two sectors that have been obviously very badly impacted. And our immediate thought was that, okay, these are searches that will get cancelled. But actually both searches went ahead. One has offered and person is on board, and the other person comes on board next week. And when we actually asked the the client company that, what's the thought process? Because your businesses are certainly going to go through very severe impact over the next couple of quarters at least. I loved the answer. The answer I got was, our belief is that we will go through pain, but we will survive through this pain because fundamentally we are a good, solid business. And because we believe that, we also know that the CXO leadership hires that we were looking at making are going to be, the skills they bring to the table are going to be required in the business even more so as we go through this period of transformation and change that we will have to. And hence, it becomes even more critical for us to have the right senior leadership in place in our organizations. Now, not every company is reacting like that. Many are panicking and many are, shedding rather than hiring. But there are businesses out there that are still looking at adding, and for the right reasons. So, it's interesting to watch both sides play out. So yes, we've signed up new searches during this time. We've also signed up career transition projects at this time. So both things are actually happening parallelly as we speak.
Okay. So, you spoke about hiring. So one question that comes to mind is, hiring CEOs, Toral, is both an art and a science. And one of the results of the pandemic is the fact that there are no face-to-face interviews happening, or very limited. At least in India, I think none are happening. Usually a CXO level candidate goes through several in-person rounds, which gives companies, the hiring supervisor, the board, CEO, a lot of comfort while taking the decision. What are some of the tools that are available to mitigate this problem and to continue hiring during this period?
So I think let me start by saying that I do believe you can't fully replace the in-person aspect of the interview process, because there is a certain X factor, a certain DNA, a certain chemistry match that is critical when you hire a leadership person into your organization. However, there are things you can do. So I think one is, the obvious one is to use video calls rather than only audio calls. So you get at least a little bit of a flavor of the person. I would say do multiple video calls with a variety of stakeholders in the business so that you actually get composite opinions, because people will react differently in different situations and you get a bit of a flavor. There are psychometric tools that you can use to add to the process at this point when you're unable to assess some of the personality aspects that you would do normally. The other, and I can't stress this enough, is again, we have a service offering which is an independent reference check offering, which we do outside of a search process that we're running for a client. So let's say you were looking at hiring someone, you've identified someone directly, your teams have found someone, or they've come through a reference, and you've gone through 4 or 5 rounds and you like the guy. Run it through a formal reference check process, because that can be one of the best indicators of past behavior, which you will otherwise miss out when the face-to-face is missing. It's a product that we offer for leadership. It goes well beyond the standard, integrity check and basics of, did the guy actually do the job he said he did? And it can go much deeper into a lot of behavioral aspects. While you can't predict what will happen in the future, but past behavior is possibly one of the best predictors you can use. So, it's definitely a product that you should use at this time to enhance the process, even while you go through the rest. And we've had companies that have gone ahead with hiring, including, an MD level hire for a 5,000 crore business, where the entire process happened online. The person joined remotely and is currently running the business for the last 3 months remotely from a different city. So it can be done. and the fit is brilliant. Both sides love each other and it's worked really well. So it can be done, but it needs a little bit of rethinking on how you would do it and focusing on certain aspects.
Right. I think this could be the moment where this will actually take off in terms of remote hiring, because, you know, when you don't have a choice, you know, you have to, you know, do the best you can.
Sorry, I'm just going to add here,
yeah,
it's
please.
actually also speeded up the process in a funny way. So, you know, traditionally face-to-face interviews also meant logistics of managing schedules of very busy people on both sides of the table, and just, you know, finding that window, having someone spend a whole day flying out to a different city for a 40-minute meeting, etc., etc. And people, I will say this, clients who traditionally would not even agree to do a phone call are moving on to Zoom interviews seamlessly, and making decisions based on that as well. So there is plus as well that comes out of this. And I know there are many HR heads who are actually quite happy to not have to do the coordination of trying to find time slots that work like they had to in the past. So.
Right. You know, a lot of people have asked me this when they got to know I was, you know, chatting with you guys, and they said that, you know, we've seen these layoffs, they're large. They're probably going to be around for a bit. There's almost a sense of unspoken fear, a panic of job loss if the pandemic continues. And, you know, we see it continuing for the foreseeable future. You know, there'll be ebbs, there'll be, you know, it'll sort of go up a little bit. What can employees do to be more relevant and add value to their companies during this period, Sonal? What can they do? I mean,
Well, there's loads of things that people can do, but I'll walk through what I've actually seen and what I've heard from CEOs that we've been talking to. So I think one is that everybody should be prepared. So, you know, you have to batten down the hatches, look at your own cost, look at your own expenditure, look at what is essential in your life, etc. I think people who've done well out of this are the ones who've stepped up. They said, what more can we do to help? So they've made themselves visible in that way. Some people, some of the people I've spoken to have said, well, you know, so many of my employees came out and said, before we could announce anything, when they knew things were bad, they said, well, we want to take a cut if that helps. We're here to let you know that we're there to support you in any way. We're here to let you know that if you need me to do anything over and above, I'm there. Some people have proactively in our own organization said, all right, I'm going to take on engagement in a different way for the group while we're all sitting at home. Somebody's taken on the responsibility to check on different things. So these are all small sort of HR things that you can do just to ease the pressure on the people around you, on the leadership team, which are not to do with how you pivot and how you do your job and how you restructure stuff. It's just basic human values that you can put forth out there, and that's serving people well. Toral, you can maybe add about...
Yeah, so I had a few. So I think one is just being open and stepping out of comfort zones. So doing things that, you know, you may not traditionally have done or think you should do. And you know, just listening and being open to doing those things. Another one I would say is a big one is just being part of the solution rather than just announcing the problem. So, you know, it's not about, oh my God, there's doom and gloom and there's no revenue and there's all of this. It's about, okay, can I do this little thing that might help move the needle one step forward? And it could be something really tiny, but it just demonstrates that you are trying to be part of the solution. Listening, learning, adapting. I think these are three things that I would say are absolutely critical. There's lots of ways to learn. I mean, there's 100 things online today. There's webinars like this, there's courses, there's white papers that are being thrown up every day. But you can also learn from colleagues. You can learn from your kids at home. I mean, I learned how to edit a video for the first time in my life, thanks to my teenage daughter. And there's no end to where you can learn. And then keeping that openness to doing things differently. I will say this, that you can sit and you can be someone who cries and says why and all of that, but ultimately, if you want to be relevant, you have to choose to try, and that's the only way you're going to fly. So there's 100 little things you can do. You have to figure which ones you bring to the table. And I'll give you a very small example. We have a colleague who's relatively junior in our system, and said, oh, what can I do? I'm really junior. And we said, okay, let's talk about what your strengths are. And one of the things she's very passionate about is photography. She ended up setting up a weekly internal photography contest for our team, which has resonated and created a lot of positivity in the team. And it's now actually something we've also opened to people who follow us on LinkedIn, that they can send in their entries and be part of the contest as well. So it's a small thing, but it just created a sense of positivity as opposed to being someone who was just whining about the issue or thinking they weren't able to influence the issue.
There's another little one. Given that chatting on WhatsApp or on video calls like this sort of democratizes your position in the room, right? Everybody can speak, everybody can type, all of people can do that. So one of the things that's happening is a lot of employees are using that as an opportunity to make themselves more visible. They're speaking out in a relatively safer environment. They're putting their hands up for different things. And there's no one glaring at them, or even if there's someone glaring at them, they can't see it. So they're going ahead and doing it. And that's been an interesting observation anyway, in terms of how people are stepping up.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think no one's kicking your shin under the table because there is no table. So I think
there's offline WhatsApp chat happening.
So there's a question, actually two questions. I'm going to combine them into one. These are from two gentlemen, Sanjay Kaul and Praval Upadhyay. And essentially the question is around what should the approach of CEOs be? Should they be towards long-term goals in these uncertain times or short-term? And what they mean is that when you're looking at short-term with all this pressure, should CEOs look inwards and work on in-house efficiencies? Or should they be trying to be agile and go for new business opportunities? What's the best bet for survival? Sonal, you want to take that?
Sure, I'll start with that. I think the immediate goal is survival and short term. And clearly, at least to start with, people would be looking at that. And it really depends on where you are in terms of business. As executive search and leadership consultants, we're also seeing a number of CEOs who are taking a slightly longer view. And this ranges from being opportunistic, saying, hey, I can actually attract much better talent than I could because of availability right now. And they're going ahead and making those bets. But that is if you can afford to. So it really depends on where your business is and what your options are.
I'll chip in there. So a couple of cases that I heard, and I thought it was fascinating to hear this. A couple of CEOs actually shared the fact that they had set up two sets of teams.
Yeah.
One set which was focused on the here and now and the issues that had to be dealt with on a daily basis, and had to be tackled, had to be addressed, things that, customer issues, everything related to the here and now. And they actually had a completely separate team parallelly, which was working on the long term or medium to long term, which was, what can we do to emerge stronger, better, leaner, etc., out of this situation, and what will we do as a business in that situation? And it was very interesting to hear them say this, because what it did was it actually ensured that both aspects got looked at and tackled, and got brought to the CEO's table for him or her to then pick what needed to be addressed immediately and what were things that had to be done from a more longer term perspective. And I thought that was a very, very good way to actually tackle the crisis per se, because you can't concentrate only on one and not the other, but you will yo-yo between the two. And if you have the same teams trying to do both, invariably they will get all confused and defocused on what they're supposed to get done. So I thought this was a great example of what a couple of businesses are doing.
So you're talking about a separate team for one-day internationals, a separate business for T20s, and a absolutely separate business for a test.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's a fair thing. I think the Aussies have done it. I think everyone should do it. Yeah, there's one interesting one from Ajay Sood. What are your clients saying in terms of managing or measuring, not managing, measuring productivity of employees as they operate from home? Anything that your clients, are saying about that? Is it all trust and, just leave it, or are there some degrees of some kind of practices that they're putting in?
Let me kick this one off. So I think this addresses a larger question of this whole work from home and where this whole thing is going on a long-term basis.
Yeah, so, in fact, Shiv is just sorry, I'm interrupting,
I'm
but
sure
Shiv just asked.
It's his pet topic at the moment. So two things here. One is that be it work from home or work from anywhere, the point is that eventually it's outcome oriented. Now that outcome may have paused a little bit in the very short term, but then you're measuring activities which will hopefully lead to the desired outcomes. So that becomes your proxy in terms of what you measure. What you're not measuring is how much screen time a person's giving, or whether he's taking a nap in the afternoon for an hour or what have you. And honestly, if you're getting your work done, okay. I mean, as long as people know you're not available, what have you, that's fine. I think on the larger question of work from home, there are people who are going all the way there or they're going all the way there. And I think the answer will probably lie in between. There will be an accelerated shift. There will be much more flexibility around this than there ever has been. And a big part of that is going to be empowerment. It's going to be trust. But they are also going to come in the stuff that we didn't get a chance to do in the crisis is set up protocols in terms of how this would actually work, what your expectations are, etc. So in my example of saying, okay, I'm going to take a nap for half an hour in the afternoon because that makes me more productive, I should have a protocol by which I can put somewhere saying, actually, you know what, I'm offline for an hour now. I'm not available. So I do that proactively. People know that I'm not available. And then when I'm back in, I check in and everybody knows I'm available. It's something simple as that. The reality of today's work from home in the crisis versus what work from home before that and after crisis, it looks like maybe completely different. Right now, we don't have any options. We're not going out. We're also doing work at home, as Shiv says, in terms of, Jhadu Poncha and all of the other pieces we're tackling. There's kids, there's all of that. A lot of these things will move around and change. Some of the things that concern me, and I'm sort of on Satya Nadella's side in terms of, where he goes saying you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are lots of reasons why people are in an organization. There is learning, there is onboarding, there's DNA, there's chemistry, there is sitting next to each other, there's just water cooler conversations, there is stuff that you can do or engagement, there is visibility into mental health, etc., which you just cannot do sitting at home. And of course, now I'm talking about jobs where you can work from home.
Correct.
So I don't think it's black and white. There are going to be shades of gray. It'll end up as a hybrid. There will be many more protocols and measures around it than they are during crisis, where everybody was overnight forced to work from home. It will be more work from anywhere rather than work from home, because not as Shiv, since he's talked about this, says quite often, we are all in the same storm, but we are in very different boats.
Yeah.
Our realities at home, or our ability or our need to work from home is very different. So it will work for some of the people, some of the time, or all of the people, but it will not work for all of the people all of the time. So there's shades of gray, and we're going to adapt to that.
Right. There's a question from
Sorry,
Dr.
I'll just add one little stat to that.
Yeah.
Completely non-scientific stat, but from the almost 200 conversations I would have had in the last 90 odd days with various 100 days, the number of times I've heard CEOs say, I can't wait to go back to office. so that I can take a bit of a break, because this work from home is working far harder than it is at
It's
work.
relentless.
Yeah,
It is relentless.
So,
I mean,
so I think people, a lot of people who wished for work from home in the past, having experienced it the way they have in this phase, are starting to realize that it's not all black or white, and you have to find a mid path between them. So there are equal number on both sides on this one. And yes, there are companies that are doing things like the formal app that monitors screen time, etc., but not something that we would recommend at all. So
yeah, I think that sort of creates it starts you in an environment, or puts you in an environment of distrust where you're doubting each other. I mean, we're a startup, but we certainly haven't. We're trusting people to do what is right and to get the job done, outcome oriented, as Sonal said.
correct.
So I think we've been focused on that.
I think though it takes, the fact that you can do that is because you already know the people, you already have an organizational DNA.
Right.
People know what is expected, they're trained to do it, all of that. So like I said, this debate can go on forever, but I think the answer will emerge, and it'll be different for different companies and different people.
Right. So Dr. Meeta Dikshit has asked a question that, companies will probably have to, or will they have to recalibrate their HR processes in the new normal? And if yes, what will be the major areas of recalibration? What processes, HR, processes will be recalibrated?
So I'll start off on that one. So we've done
Sure.
a bunch of roundtables actually with CHROs in the recent times. And absolutely, I think they're all re-looking at all HR policies. There's so right from your hiring policies to attrition policies or trends that they're looking at, to as someone said to me just the other day that well, this year you can have the fanciest performance management system, but the likelihood of too much performance is not going to be there. So what do you focus on instead? So it's more about skilling, it's more about improving capabilities, it's more about productivity, efficiency, etc., that they're moving from where they were earlier on some of those things. Similarly, someone else said, well, this year for the first time, I don't have to sit and worry about increments, because guess what? There aren't any. And that used to take up a huge amount of time for most HR heads in the typical March, April time frame. So, they're re-looking at everything. Obviously, the flexible working policies are going to see tremendous changes. And again, like we just said, if it's different for different businesses and different situations. A lot of companies are re-looking at their fixed and variable or variabilizing compensation and trying to find ways to do that so that, in situations like this, rather than salary cuts, if you're already in a system where it's variabilized, if there is no performance, there is, an automatic cut that happens. So that's another one that we've heard a lot about. There's obviously a lot of thought on health and safety, and HR is leading from the front on that in terms of just making sure that they're doing what it takes as an organization to ensure health and safety for their employees, both when they come back to work, but also while they are working from home. And different companies have done very interesting work around that area actually. And right down to office design, how do you rejig office space to make sure you have all the norms you're going to need for at least the next year or so, et cetera, et cetera. So there's tremendous change actually, and the CHRO is one function that's certainly extremely busy at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would think that they're probably being challenged like never before, because there's a crisis on all fronts. There's a question from Vikram, who would say, and he's asking, what advice would you give a person in his or her late 40s or early 50s who gets laid off during this economic turmoil? Any sort of restart mantra, anything that you would suggest? I know it's a tough one, but
It is a tough one.
Yeah.
It is a tough one. I think there is, it's the time when you have to relook at your life and the way you live it. It's a time when you have to relook at your skills and how relevant they are in today's marketplace. It's a time for perhaps reskilling. It's a time for considering options that you may or may not have looked at in the past. Different sorts of brands and different sorts of jobs. You may want to recalibrate your expectations of compensation. If you are ending up spending time on the bench, maybe use that time productively to do different things. It could range from giving back or not-for-profit or stuff that you can do to keep yourself engaged and productive, and you have something to show for at the end of 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is that it takes you to find your feet. I would say it's also an opportunity to engage in your industry or your space. There are opportunities to do that through different forums, not just that is online, of course, in terms of participation in discussions or writing stuff or whatever you on LinkedIn. It also helps to make you more visible, but it also helps to keep your feet wet. Consider signing up as an interim manager. So you may not get a full-time, but you might get a series or a couple of short part-time gigs or short projects, so that at least, again, you have something that you are doing and something to show for it at the end of it. Be nice to headhunters during good times so that they remember you during bad times. There are different things based on your reality, but there is the same thing that applies to a business in terms of, this cry and why and then try and fly. It's the same principles, really. You go through what you have to stock, and then you have to act and create situations for yourself, because it's not going to fall on your lap.
Toral, you want to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty complete in terms of.
Right. There are a couple of questions that have come around. One is from Open Ashar, one is from Hiral, that, there are lots of small entrepreneurs or even mid-sized entrepreneurs, first generation, run an organization of about 100 crores. Still a MSME in some sense, 150 crores. Still an MSME. What's your advice to them about talent management during this period? I mean, any suggestion that you would have? Is it a good time to bring in talent? How do you manage the existing talent? Should you look at, what would your 30,000 feet without knowing the organization, what would your thought process be for them?
From a talent management perspective, I don't know that it changes based on the size of your organization. I think if you are a smaller organization and perhaps by that definition a little bit more tight-knit, it's the time to reinforce your culture and perhaps make that count in a different way. It's also an opportunity to reach for a higher level of person on the flip side of that 45-year-old who was displaced, to bring some of that gray hair and that experience or resume into your organization that you may not have had access to before.
Or could have afforded.
Yeah. So you absolutely can experiment with it. But again, it depends quite a lot on your reality and what you're going through and what you're able to do. But absolutely.
Toral, anything to add on that?
I mean, I would just say that if you can afford it, of course, it's probably the best time to add really good caliber talent at compensation levels that are not completely up there. But obviously you have to first look at your business and what it can actually sustain and manage before you can take that call. And existing teams, of course, culture, communication are absolutely critical. Engagement is critical. Rallying them around a greater purpose becomes critical. figuring how you can turn this to your advantage, well, or less of a disadvantage as a crisis becomes important. It's a rough patch, but you have to ride through it. And the decisions you take now will impact what your business looks like when the rough patch is over. So.
I think that's well put. Sonal, I'm going to ask two more questions and then we'll close. But this one's a simple one for you from Manish, who is saying, is there a talent scarcity issue in the banking sector at a senior management level? I don't know if it's private sector or public sector or multinational banks, but is there a challenge there?
At the macro level, no. At one level, yes, because there are various skill sets which are always which have become in short supply. So you will see right now, if you're looking for risk managers, that's in short supply. We're getting a lot of inquiries around people who know the digital space, and that's been actually a trend for the last few years, but that continues to escalate in terms of skill sets again within banking. So there's no one answer. It really does depend on where you're playing within that whole space. So of course, there's oversupply of given the pain that the sector has seen, particularly the NBFCs have seen.
Right.
But there are pockets of demand as well and mismatches as well.
So the sector you talked about was digital.
The skill set I talked about was
skill set in banking. Okay, great. I think Shiv is, he's been at his best through this. He's come up with a phrase, I mean, almost biblical in its nature. It says, treat your people the way you would like to be treated. I think that's a good advice for all entrepreneurs, all CEOs, all CHROs on the call, as always. I'm going to end with one question. Yeah, and it's not a tricky one, but it's my favorite at least, that you work closely with all CXOs, CEOs, CFOs, CHROs, CMOs, chief sales officers, CTOs, etc. Whose job is the most difficult in the new normal? All of them have laid claim to that title, but I'm particularly, and I may have a bias, I'm feeling bad for CFOs during this time because they have to find liquidity to keep the wheels of business turning. I also feel very sorry for chief risk officers equally because they're my customers. But do either of you have a nominee for the most difficult job title?
So yeah, I can pick that up. So I think, look, all CXOs have it tough right now. All leadership has it tough right now. So like you correctly said, the CFO has to deal with liquidity issues as well as balance sheets just changing dramatically. The chief sales officer has to deal with the lack of customers and revenue. A chief marketing officer has to deal with everything changing, consumer behavior completely changing, traditional routes no longer being available, and no budgets as well. The CHRO, of course, is battling between balancing business needs and people safety and wellness needs. The chief digital officer, who everyone thinks has got it easy, is actually dealing with accelerated pace like never before and having to actually make sure all of that works. The chief technology officer is dealing with just making sure the basic nuts and bolts of the business hold up, which have never really been tested the way they're being tested today. But if I had to pick one, for me, it's the CEO. This is someone who's, having to pull all of this together. Is on one hand battling business survival. On the other hand, he's battling scared employees. He's battling health and safety. He's battling how to keep all of the leadership motivated. He's battling how to be the voice of calm, both internally and externally through this crazy time. And it's almost like he's, repairing the plane, which is going through turbulence at 10,000 feet, while actually flying the plane. I pity the CEO who has to really deal with all of this and pull it all together. So he or she is my nominee.
Yes, Sonal.
One more. I pity the chief supply chain who has to find a supply chain now that doesn't include China. Best of luck with that.
So that's a perfect segue, and we didn't plan this, but a perfect segue. We on Saturday we are doing our sixth session in the Rubix Knowledge Series, and that's on building a resilient supply chain in the new normal, and that's with Neeraj Ambani, Group President of Supply Chain of Reliance Industries, and Kaushik Roy, who is the Head of Supply Chain Management product for Maersk for West, Central Africa, and South Asia. So they're going to be on this chat at 11 a.m. It's up on LinkedIn, etc. And please do log in. But Sonal, Toral, thank you so much. This has been an engaging discussion in more ways than one. I think we don't understand the sort of pressure that you guys are under also, because at one level, like you said, work's coming in, but you have to make sure that you're getting the right talent, fit them in art, science, all of that, but in a very, very uncertain environment. And at the same time, folks who have unfortunately had to, lose their jobs, and they're reaching out to you for emotional support or for support. So I am sure that's a difficult part of what you do. But on behalf of, everyone on this call, thank you very much for taking the time and for being here with me and with Rubix. We really appreciate it. So thank you, and everyone. I hope this was very useful. We'll see you on the other side. Bye.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Keep trying, guys. Keep trying. It's there. The rainbow at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely.